Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to tonight's Green Living Seminar presentation. I'm Elena Traster in the Environmental Studies Department. This semester's Green Living Seminar is organized around the theme of sustainable food and farming. All presentations are free and open to the public. They take place on Thursdays at 5:30 p.m. in the Feigenbaum Center for Science and Innovation at MCLA, room 121. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes with an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And a quick announcement for next week's presentation. We hope you'll all come back Thursday, February 28th. James Mayer, farmer and manager of Grateful Greens Farm, will present a lecture titled Indoor Farming, the Future of Food. Today's presentation on farming in the city will be given by Lydia Sisson, co-founder of Mill City Grows. Thank you so much for coming.
So hi everyone, my name is Lydia Sisson. I'm one of the co-founders of Mill City Grows with Francie Slater. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself, and that way you can know a little bit about why I started Mill City Grows before I jump in to what we do and why we're farming in the city. So I grew up in rural South Carolina, a little bit further from here than Lowell, and when I was growing up, we did a lot of things for ourselves. We had chickens and gardens, and I grew up in a coastal community that had shrimping and crabbing and things like that. But I was born in Massachusetts, and so I came to the Northeast for college. And while I was at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, I started farming because there was this wonderful nonprofit called the Poughkeepsie Farm Project that had rented land from Vassar College and was running a farm, and students could do work study there. And so I was about, good. You can dim it if you need it. So in my first year in college, I got the work study position at the farm, and I got to get up early in the morning, go out and harvest with folks, do the farmers market in town, and really I felt like I was building community there. I was able to meet people in Poughkeepsie, to get outside of the college walls and really understand a little bit more about the food system. Another pivotal thing for me that happened in college was that I studied abroad. I went to Brazil and I studied the Landless workers movement, which is the largest social movement in Latin America, where people are actually squatting on land to regain the rights of land to farm them, because there's extreme inequality in land ownership in Brazil. At this time, I got to witness a group of people who had been squatting on a piece of land for about 7 years, living in tents and plastic housing made of sheets of kind of trash bags, basically. They got the right for that, to use that land and to own that land from the president while I was there. And that made me really understand that there is so much power in having ownership of your land, but also being able to provide for yourself, to grow your own food, and to be in control of your livelihood. So those were two pivotal things that happened for me, and as soon as I was out of college, I knew that farming was something that I wanted to do and participate in, and I knew that that was going to be my tool for change. So my first job out of college was working in Lowell, actually, at a youth program that had a farm and culinary program. I then went and apprenticed on the North Shore of Massachusetts at a production farm that was vegetable and animal production. And then I started my own CSA farm, which is community-supported agriculture. It was a small farm on 5 acres, and I ran it by myself, and I worked harder than I ever had in my life, but I felt amazing. And farming for me was both like an intellectual and a physical thing that really, it fulfilled a lot for me. But my struggle while running my own farm in North Reading was that I was growing for people who could afford food. And I really wanted to use this tool of farming and growing to really work on helping people have the food system that they wanted. And I felt a little disillusioned, so I went back to school in Lowell. I got into a graduate program, and I started thinking about how I could do my work in the community that I was living in, because I was living in Lowell, running a farm in North Reading, and commuting and going to grad school, etc. And so I was able to really think about, in my 2 years in grad school, how to change a food system. I worked with a group of people on a community food assessment, and we used participatory design where the community really helped to build the project and inform the community food assessment. And Mill City Grows really grew out of that. Francie and I had been working on a lot of different projects together, and both commuting out of Lowell. But that was the birth of Mill City Grows. So that's a little bit about my story and why I'm here today. So Mill City Grows, we started 7 years ago. We're in our 8th season now. And the reason that we started was that this was really what food access looks like in Lowell. This was about 2011, and there was just an abundance of cheap food, and there was this choice that people had to make. Buy a lot of calories for a cheap amount of money, or buy little calories for a lot. So just in Lowell, through our community food assessment, we found that a lot of people were walking to their corner stores. That's where they were accessing their food, but prices were really expensive for fresh fruits and vegetables. And so we also learned that 4 in 10 said that they couldn't find these fresh fruits and vegetables near their home. So it's 4 out of 10 people surveyed. So that means Lowell's a city of about 120,000 people, that 43,000 people can't find food close to home. And in low-income communities, you have all these issues that compound this. Transportation. Do you have a car? Are you walking? Are you walking with your kids and a cart of groceries? Do you rely on the bus or a cab? There were a lot of things standing in people's way to get fresh, local veggies at an affordable price. So up popped Mill City Grows in 2011. We started with 1 community garden and 1 education series, and our goal and mission is to foster food justice and improve physical health, economic independence, and environmental sustainability in Lowell through increased access to land, locally grown food, and education. A mouthful of a mission and a really, really aggressive idea. Food justice. What is it? Anybody? Did you guys read the article? Did you think about what it means to you? Any ideas? All right, I'll give you the answer. Food justice is not about forcing people to eat food they don't want. It's not about handing out bags of food that say, here's your peanut butter and your pasta and your dark leafy greens. It's about changing the world they live in so that they can make the choices about what they eat and believing that those choices will lead them to a healthier and more enjoyable diet. It's measuring success not in shrinking bodies, but in growing appetites for the food that keeps people healthy and happy. It's trusting people to know what's best for them and making sure they can access it. It's the long game, not the quick fix. So we're in this long game of trying to have the city of Lowell build a food system that they feel is reflective of their needs and wants. So when we founded Mill City Grows, we started with 1 community garden and 1 education program. Since our launch, we've grown exponentially. And what I want to talk about a little bit tonight is that journey and how the journey is creating a healthier food system and how that really ties into a much broader food system in the region, but also in the Commonwealth. And I do just want to say that Mill City Grows is not alone. We are 1 organization out of many that are doing similar work throughout Massachusetts. And there are so many wonderful examples that I'll kind of reference as I go. But we have we kind of have a holistic model about food justice. It's not about just giving out food. It's about having folks grow their own food, be able to shop where they want to, and also knowing what to do with food. So we have food access and food education programming, including community gardens, community education, urban farms, and mobile markets. Here on the left is our youth employment program. They're learning some knife skills and making lunch. They do work in the summer. And on the right is our former mobile market manager, Dai Kim. He's teaching baby how to eat beets. So our theory of change is that when you have blighted areas in the city that are attracting dumping and maybe attracting behavior that's not desired, you can change and transform spaces through adding purpose. And purpose, we use food and agriculture as the purpose in the spaces. So creating vibrant, active green spaces where people are coming together to grow food. They're also coming together to shop for food. And then they are building community around this food. So our model is that we use a lot of grassroots organizing. We identify lots, but before we go and put in a community garden, we do door knocking, we have neighborhood meetings, we get participant engagement. We've had people say, like, we don't want this garden here, and we have to take that feedback. We have practical education, so classes, hands-on training, and then we build a lot of strategic partnerships. So almost all of our community gardens are on city-owned land. Our urban farms are on city-owned land, university-owned land, and private land. Our school gardens are all on schools. So there are a lot of different partnerships just for the land itself, but then we have tons of partnerships that allow us to do our work. So this is one of our urban farms. This was our first urban farm, actually, and this is what it looked like beforehand. It was a lot that was not used. It was a former building that had burned down. The property has gone through a lot of different tax title issues. And then this is the lot after we came in. You can see the same building in the back. So this is the first year of our urban farm. And you can see it completely changes the vibe of the neighborhood. There are engaging flowers and plants, and this farm in particular, I always say, like, you can never work here without being just like interrupted all the time. So you're kind of constantly talking to people, and constantly somebody will walk by and say, "Oh, is that chard, or is that rhubarb, or is that broccoli?" And you're constantly talking about food, and everybody has some kind of agricultural history that they want to connect with, which is amazing. So here's what we do. We transform the food system in Lowell through really holistic programming. Sometimes it feels a little overwhelming that we do too many things, but sometimes we say, if not us, then who? So through food access, we have 3 urban farm sites and a greenhouse. We have a year-round mobile market, and we're launching farm shares in 2019, and we have 7 community gardens that serve 199 people and families. For our food education, we have 14 school gardens. We have youth education in and out of school, summer jobs for youth, family cooking classes, a gardener training program, Garden Leadership Institute, and we do educational volunteer and farm apprentice programs. So I'm going to kind of dive into what that looks like. So our community garden programs, when you're farming in this city, there are lots of issues. So all of our beds are raised beds because we're actually not allowed to test the soil because it's city-owned land. If there were a contaminant, it would go up to the higher powers and they'd be forced to clean it up. So we always assume that there's lead or something in the soil, and we cap and build up. So we build raised bed gardens with new compost. In our 7 gardens, 4 of them are in parks, so they're in community spaces. And we have 199 garden plots that serve over 425 people. Gardeners are constantly maintaining the space. They do work days, they do skill shares, and then we teach a series of classes called the Gardener Training Program that are different educational hands-on gardening classes. Excuse me. And then we teach every winter a Garden Leadership Institute where we train gardeners to be volunteer garden leaders and help run the garden. A huge part of this is that we're trying to get community members to actually run the gardens, and this is their space. So we're training them on how to manage meetings, how to manage conflict resolution, about some of the bigger issues around our food system and food justice, as well as gardening techniques. So our other education programs include our youth education programs, where we have 14 school gardens at Lowell Public Schools, so we're in about 50% of the schools in Lowell. We have Food Corps service members who are AmeriCorps members that deliver in-school and after-school education, and we do family farm-to-table cooking classes where families come together at schools and they learn how to cook together. Scratch meals, seasonal, all with local produce. And then our summer programming include our Youth Food Justice Program, which are field trips out to our farms, and our Youth Summer Employment, which is called our J Squad, or our Justice Squad. Our urban farms, I mentioned this, we have 3 sites on over 5 acres in the city. We grow 68 crops, and different types of crops, and we have about 30,000 pounds of food harvested each year, and almost 800 volunteers engaged each year. And then our mobile market is a really cool tool where it's a farm stand on wheels where we go all over the city to distribute our food at affordable prices. We do stops particularly at hospitals, health centers, and senior facilities. We do a year-round stop indoors, and we also have a winter stop at the senior center. We accept all forms of payment, SNAP, WIC, and senior coupons, cash, credit, and debit. And there's a very exciting program in Massachusetts called the Healthy Incentives Program, where folks who are on SNAP are able to use between $40 and $80 a month just on fresh fruits and vegetables grown in Massachusetts at farm stands, farmers markets, mobile markets, and CSAs with participating farmers. It's a really amazing program, and we've seen it have a huge impact in Lowell. We also offer discounts for residents using subsidized coupons. So in 2018, we were able to grow almost 40,000 pounds of food throughout the city. I mentioned that we had over 400 gardeners. Our mobile markets brought produce to low-income neighborhoods. We had 65% of our customers use SNAP, WIC, and senior coupons. And we've had 2,000 youth and adults learning about growing food at our farms and gardens, and 50 families learning to cook healthier meals together. So I'm going to just stop there and go back to a pretty picture so that you can see some pretty pictures. Yeah, let's look at this. And I just want to talk about urban agriculture a little bit more broadly and why it's an important tool in our food system. So we're not really ever thinking that urban farms are going to grow enough food for everyone to eat. But what we are thinking is that the closer the food is to people, the more curious and engaged people are going to be in your food system. As I was talking about this site, how I always am talking to people. Just across the street is the Transitional Living Center, the homeless shelter in the city. There are tons and tons of people passing by every day, and everyone has a food story. People eat food 3 times a day, hopefully, and when you bring food close to people, the conversations start happening and people start learning about where their food is coming from. They get curious, and they also get really empowered. So one of the things for me with starting in a more rural farming background, to come to the city, I realized how powerful food is for people to connect around. So while when I shared that paper with you, while a lot of people might say urban farms should be producing a lot of food, we feel like urban food production can include small gardens in people's backyards, can include community gardens and school gardens. All of these are tools and ways to bring attention to agriculture and to where your food comes from. They all start conversations and they start connections. So that is a really big reason why we kind of blow up farming and say that all urban agriculture can include gardening and other things like that. And then another important thing I think about urban agriculture is that it kind of adds all these ripple effects to farming that you might not see as much in a rural setting. You understand so many issues around inequality in the urban setting and access, and that's why food justice is so core to our work. So there are a couple things that I have changed for Mill City Grows as we're learning and growing that I think is really important about the path of urban agriculture. One is, and you'll learn about this in your next class, is that there's a lot of innovation in the urban setting. So for people who actually do want to grow for profit in the urban setting, it's really, really important, I think, that we're looking towards innovation and how to grow a lot on a small space. In this space, we do everything by hand because everything is capped and we've brought in new soil. That is a lot of work. It's a lot of man and woman power to do all of our farming by hand. So we're seeing a lot more things like hydroponics and things like that kind of popping up. Our bigger urban farm is 4 acres, and we do things with tractors, and it's mechanized. So that brings more efficiency to our production. But there is a sense of inefficiency to urban agriculture. Never on a farm do you stop 20 times while you're weeding or while you're planting to have conversations about food. But that's the beauty of it. You're constantly engaging the public in food. And I think that is a big component of why we are doing this work in the city. The other thing I want to talk about with urban agriculture is how it kind of builds community and builds resilience. So I'm going to just tell you the first story about the first garden that we started. The first garden that we started is in this neighborhood called Back Central. It's a really tiny neighborhood with tiny streets, not a lot of green space, but there was this one park called Rotary Club Park. The park was had been through many iterations. It had had a basketball court and a volleyball court. It had play equipment. It has a skate park now. But everything had not stuck. The play equipment got burned down. There was dumping. There was drug use. And the neighbors were constantly calling the police, saying, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So the park had so many challenges. And the community group that was the community association in that neighborhood wanted to have something positive. So that's how we started. It was this one community garden. They called us and said, can you help? And we helped design and install a 40-bed community garden with the city. And the Parks Department head at that time said to us, this will never work. This is bound to fail. There's no way that this garden isn't going to get burned to the ground within the first year. But we used our grassroots organizing, we used our door knocking, and we really built a group of community members who lived close by, who wanted to grow together. We built a group, basically, out of the garden. And so people signed up for garden plots, and they came there every day to tend their gardens, and they were so proud and engaging. They engaged the skate kids to come over. If kids jumped the fence and broke into the hose, they called their moms, and they knocked on their doors, and they reprimanded them. And they called us constantly if they saw things happening. And people felt so proud of their space and their garden, and they put so much energy into that space that they really began to own it. The parks commissioner, he actually started calling us and saying, I have another park that I need your help in. And so the next year we built 2 more gardens. And the year after that, we built more gardens. And so really you can see how the ripple effect of building community and actually engaging green space creates ownership, and it creates a sense of resilience. People start knowing each other and talking to each other, and they help each other. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about urban agriculture is in this day and age where we are kind of starting to isolate more. We're on our phones a lot. We use social media a lot. In the garden, everyone's talking to each other. They're looking each other in the eyes. They're sharing recipes. They're sharing information. And they're really teaching each other about food. The other beautiful thing for us in Lowell is that we have an incredibly diverse community. So in the city of Lowell, we have the second largest population of Cambodian residents in the country, second to Long Beach, California. After the Khmer Rouge, where there was mass genocide in Cambodia, a lot of Cambodian refugees migrated to the U.S., and then a lot of them had a second migration to Lowell. And so we have a very, very large population, and there's a lot of cultural tradition and food tradition in the Cambodian diet. And we've seen in Lowell, because it's the first American industrial city, that there are lots of waves of immigrants that come into the community. So we have tons and tons of amazing food heritage in the city. So in our gardens, we have about 19 languages spoken. We have Burmese gardeners, Bhutanese gardeners, Cambodian gardeners, African gardeners, Portuguese gardeners, people from all over the world, and they come together and they share food traditions. I have been farming for a while, and I learn new crops every year from our gardeners. So in Burmese culture, there's a crop called sour leaf. It's very, very important to their diet. I think it's in the hibiscus family. It's the strangest growing crop, but it's really, really important that they can grow their own crops in this community where they couldn't necessarily access them at the grocery store. So this is another important part of urban agriculture, is that you can really showcase cultural traditions and do some cultural preservation through the crops that you grow near you, which, it takes a while for those crops to maybe come into the grocery store. We don't always see things like different Southeast Asian greens and things like that. We've learned a lot from our gardeners about their desire to grow these cultural crops. So this year we're actually piloting a program where some of our community gardeners are actually one of our community gardeners is actually going to take a space in this farm and run a little market garden where he's going to kind of test some of his cultural crops, see if he wants to bring them to market, see if creating larger spaces for community gardeners to grow into market gardeners is a viable option for community members to have more autonomy and power over their food. The other thing about this is that with a really large refugee population, a lot of people have agriculture and farming in their background, but then they come to the Northeast where it snows all the time, and it's really hard to transition to this climate. So that's one way that I think, urban agriculture can also help support cultural traditions. Another thing that we're working on this year and kind of changing and shifting in our model is, in the beginning, our mobile market just went anywhere we could possibly go and reach people that didn't have a full-service grocery store. Now we're looking at a little bit more of a targeted impact with our partnerships within the healthcare community, because as we see in our society that we have a lot of diet-related health issues. So we're working with our hospital and our health center on increasing vegetable consumption through farm shares. So we're kind of tailoring these farm shares to meet different diet-related diseases. Cardiovascular health and diabetes are the two that we're looking at targeting, and really prescribing food as medicine, as a way to help people have a healthier lifestyle. And so these are brand new partnerships that are starting this year, and really exciting programs that we think are going to also change the way people interact with their food. And the other part of that, too, is that there's so much food education that needs to go into a share. So how many of you know how to cook? Yeah? How many of you have really great knife skills? Yeah? Yeah, great. How many of you eat dark leafy greens regularly? Gosh, you guys are great. So when I do a lot of my classes, so we bring a lot of students and college students out to our farms, but I've done a couple classes, and you ask people what their favorite food is, and it's like hamburgers, mac and cheese, things like that. And those are all delicious things, but what we want is to get people to eat more vegetables, because it is going to help improve health, but a lot of people don't have the tools, or they're living alone and they don't want to cook a big elaborate meal. So we do a lot of food education with our markets and our farm shares, and also with students, teaching them how to make really easy, simple recipes with vegetables so that they can incorporate more vegetables into their diet. That's just another part of giving people the tools and the power to actually make the change in their community. And I would say the long game for Mill City Grows and for urban agriculture in some ways is just to shine a bigger and brighter light on the food system, and to think about ways that we can constantly be transforming spaces to reflect what our community needs. I don't have a picture of this, unfortunately, but I'll have to share it maybe later. But our next step with the University of Massachusetts Lowell has been that we've created this urban agriculture greenhouse, where we're trying to engage students now on how to solve problems around urban agriculture. So the first thing we did was we built a greenhouse, and we didn't heat it, because who needs heat in the Northeast? And so we're trying to get the engineering groups and student groups and clubs to really help us design sustainable ways to kind of meet these challenges. And what we're doing over the long term is engaging a different group each year to try to tackle some urban ag challenges. And we're doing this from little kids in elementary school all the way to the college level, trying to get people to think about the ways that we can turn urban centers into very productive spaces, but also deal with some of the waste that can happen in our food system. I'm just going to back up here. So as I showed that in 2018 we kind of hit all of these milestones, we also are just kind of finishing the end of our strategic plan, where we're planning on the next phases of growth. And some of the things that we want to see over time to really create a more food just community is more access to people in different neighborhoods. So currently our gardens are in maybe about half of the neighborhoods in Lowell. We'd like to see a garden in every single neighborhood in Lowell by our 10th anniversary. We're working on a project right now where we're working with Lowell Public Schools to really see how we can bring more fresh local food into the school system. We're never going to grow it all in the school gardens, but again, the school gardens are this kind of pathway into local food. So what we've been doing is we've been featuring, have you guys heard of Mass Farm to School? Anybody? Or Harvest of the Month? No? There's a really awesome organization called the Massachusetts Farm to School Project, and they do this great program called Harvest of the Month, where we feature a different crop from Massachusetts, and we feature it in the cafeteria doing taste tests. So we've been doing that with Lowell Public Schools, and we're working with a humongous food service provider, Aramark, to get local food into Lowell Public School students. And can anybody guess how much you can spend on a reimbursable meal in schools? $2. No, keep going down.
175.
Down.
125.
Keep going.
75 cents.
80 cents. You're really close. So the students in Lowell, everyone gets free lunch and breakfast, but they can only spend 80 cents per meal. So, and they have to meet all of these different USDA standards for what a meal has. So how do you incorporate local food? Maybe local food that's being grown for, we're growing carrots that we're selling for $2 a pound. How do you get enough local food into students' plates? It's almost impossible at 80 cents a meal. But we might not be able to get our carrots on the lunch line, but we can definitely get more local to this region carrots on the lunch line, and part of that is drawing attention through the school garden program, through our in-school and after-school education, and really our deep partnerships with Lowell Public Schools and Airmark, where now we're bringing a highlight to local food and supporting a lot of local farms. Also with, and that's really where I think like the ripple effect of urban agriculture has huge impact, is we're bringing we're shining a light, and then we're allowing so many other people to kind of come in. Our mobile market, we've actually decided that for years we were just growing the stops. We went from 6 stops in the beginning to 11 stops this last year. And we've done a point of reflection where we're saying, so how are we doing? We've helped start an anchor market that runs year-round with a for-profit partner that they're now running on their own. And they have multiple local farms that are there and vending. So now we're kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, maybe we can have less market stops. Let's do this medically tailored farm share. So I think like the thing about being an urban ag nonprofit is that you kind of get to go where you're needed the most. Right now we're really focusing on how to get healthier school food, how to get more gardens in neighborhoods where they need them, how to get people with low-income people with health issues food and food education. And I think that this is kind of the arc of Mill City Grows as we're kind of reforming our models and solidifying them, but also able to move where we are needed most. I promised that I would talk a little bit about the structure of our organization. So we're able to do all of these impacts. When we started, Francie and I were just 2 people volunteering our time. We volunteered for about 6 months before we got paid for maybe like 10 hours a week. So that we were able to start our nonprofit under the fiscal agency of another nonprofit. So we had this crazy idea. We didn't want to necessarily incorporate as a full-blown nonprofit, so we had somebody take us under their wing, the YWCA of Lowell. And we were able to grow for our first 4 years under the YWCA of Lowell. And then we incorporated in 2014 and got our own 501c3 status. We were able to move into our own office space, and we have grown now to 12 full-time year-round staff, 4 AmeriCorps members, and we get about 3 to 5 seasonal team members. Our budget started at 0, and now we have about $1 million budget each year. We spend our money in many different ways. Lots of it are in capital improvements and investments in our spaces. So this year we're renovating all of our first gardens that started 7 years ago. Now the beds, wood rots. They're degrading, so we're renovating those this year. We have done some really amazing projects for building outdoor education spaces. And our funding comes from all different sources. We have about 2/3 of our funding comes from grants, both government grants and private foundations, and 1/3 of our funding comes from revenue we generate through our mobile markets, as well as individual donations. It's really important that we have a diversified funding model because things change. We have different administrations and different programs that we can access, and also the priorities in our communities change. In Lowell, our community is really, really hard hit by the opioid epidemic. So it's really challenging when there are some very, very, very real needs, and we're all applying, a lot of us nonprofits are applying to the same community foundation. So we want to make sure we have a diversified funding source to weather the tides, but also we really want to make sure that eventually we're building empowerment models and food justice models that actually are serving the community so that we don't have to constantly be growing, that actually our community members are managing the gardens instead of us growing staff. We've always worked to make sure that as we add community gardens, we don't necessarily add staff. We build leadership in the gardens that are the oldest, and they take on more and more ownership, and therefore we don't have to spend as much staff time supporting them. And it's a challenge because we're all dealing with people and plants, which I don't know which one's more temperamental, but so there is the challenge that you're dealing with people and their lives change, and we don't always have the same people. We were just talking about that. Community gardens are very tough because people move or they change jobs and they don't have as much time. But we really are trying to build this empowerment model for resilience. But I'll close just by telling you a couple of stories that really helped me think about why urban agriculture is so important to the food system. I think when you deal with younger kids, you always have a little bit, their light in the world that makes you really reflect. But I've been going to a lot of after-school classes where we're teaching about gardening and nutrition education. And recently they've been studying like how to make kind of different sauces and different things that maybe would have a lot of sugar or different things, additives. And so I was sitting and watching this after-school class, and one of the young women, she's probably like 8. She got called to be dismissed to her parents, and she just would not leave the classroom. She wanted to make her lettuce roll so bad that had all of these fresh veggies that she knew and she'd been talking about, and she kept saying, like, I'm not going, and the teacher had to be like, your dad's here, you gotta go. And she went and got her dad and made him come back into the classroom to finish making this thing that she'd been making, this lettuce roll up, because she really wanted to finish that experience. She wanted to try that food. The kids that are doing the taste tests in the cafeteria, they're trying things like butternut squash hummus and kale salad, and they are excited about it and loving it and wanting more. So I think that we really can change the way our communities and the way we kind of interact with food by exposing people to it, by continuing to talk about it and have it in your face in the urban setting, because it isn't, as I was driving out here, I saw lots of farms, but in Lowell, before Mill City Grows, you didn't see any farms, you didn't see any gardens, and now there's this place for people to engage with their food system on a regular basis and really transform it and make it into what they want it to be. So it's been a really exciting 7 years. I feel that we are just at the tip of the iceberg, really. I think that the issues and challenges of the food system are really great, but I'm excited that we've created space and community to challenge that and to grow together and also to really have a little bit more ownership of our food system. So I will open it up for questions now. Yeah? So the funny story is that I knew that the city owned this 4 acres of land, and I went to the city manager and I was like, I want to run a community farm on this 4 acres of land. And he was like, oh, that's nice. And I never heard from him again. But then his assistant, he called us and said, there's this community group that wants to start a community garden. Can you help us? And I have never, and still have never actually ever been a community gardener, but I was like, yeah, I can run a community garden. So Francie and I were like, yeah, we can do this. And really, people lined up. We filled 40 beds before they were constructed. We just did flyering around the neighborhood. We had a few neighborhood meetings. In a lot of our neighborhood meetings, we asked people, like, what are you nervous about with the garden? What are things that would make it successful? What would make it unsuccessful? So we really helped answer a lot of those questions. People were worried about vandalism. But we had 40 families signed up from the get-go, and we started having a wait list right afterwards. We have a wait list right now of 180 families. And we can't build gardens fast enough. We are always trying to find new places, but it's a little tricky. We have to use non-buildable lots, so they're not developable. But yeah, since we've started, really, and a lot of it, word travels fast. So another great story is that first garden, we had 2 Burmese gardeners growing there. And people said, we don't want to grow in gardens. We did that back in Burma. Like, we have our grocery stores and food pantries, and, we get our food here in the U.S., the way we get food in the U.S. And then those 2 gardeners shared food with all of the other Burmese families. things that they didn't have. A lot of Burmese families eat tomato leaves in soups. I had never seen anyone eat the leaves of tomatoes before. So they were sharing all these things, and everyone said, it tastes like Burma. This tastes like food in Burma. And so the next year we had 30 families with applications in, and we didn't have enough space for them. So, that the word of mouth really helped, and we were constantly recruiting and doing a lot of outreach. But yeah, it hasn't been hard to recruit people. It's harder to build the gardens. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you do when it's winter, the non-growing season with all these folk?
Yeah. So our gardeners grow from April to November. The gardens are open. Some of them do season extension, so they build a little hoop house over their garden beds, and they'll go and continue for community gardeners. Our mobile markets run year-round. Now that we have this large greenhouse, we're growing year-round. It's both in-ground and tabletop. We do all of our youth programming throughout the year. It's school year based, so we're doing after school in 5 different schools right now. We run family cooking classes. We've been doing a teen series with the Boys and Girls Club for cooking, and there's lots of local food available. We grow storage crops, but then we partner with about 14 different farms in the region, including some farms in Montague and other places a little bit west of us, where we're bringing in food for our local food for all of our education programs and our markets as well. So we're staying pretty busy. I wish that there was a downtime, but it doesn't really ever feel like it. We're planning right now. We're finishing up our crop plan, finishing our farm share program deliverables, meeting with a lot of partners. We do a little bit of reflection, which is nice, and team time. But this morning before I came out here, we were cleaning up a school garden after the snow that hadn't been winterized. So, we were out there in the snow and shoveling and cleaning it up and getting it ready for the spring.
I'm curious how the finances work, and how you all this. So to get a garden plot, is there a cost to that, or is it subsidized?
There's a cost. It's seriously subsidized. It's $20 for the year. You get a 4x10 garden plot, access to water, and shared tools. If folks can't afford the $20, they can apply for a scholarship. If you get a scholarship, we also provide seeds and transplants and things like that. Our garden leaders get a free plot. We do an annual seed swap where we get donations from a lot of different seed companies. It's on April 6th, and people come and they get seeds and swap seeds that maybe they saved. So we offer a lot of opportunities for people to get the resources that they need to grow. For the market garden program that we're just developing, we're trying to figure out if there will be a fee for that and what a reasonable fee is. But we're working with a pilot participant this year, and he's going to really help us with some feedback to see if there's any revenue he can actually generate off of a small piece of land. And all of the community gardeners, they're growing food just to eat for their households. Some of our gardeners are incredibly good. They're growing about 100 pounds of food in a 4x10 garden plot. A lot of interplanting and companion planting. So it does help to offset their diet and their home economy, for sure.
And one other question about the mobile market.
Yeah.
Is are you able to sell that? How do you set the price on that to keep it affordable?
Yeah, we actually we try to keep our prices pretty in line with for-profit growers because we don't ever want to undercut any growers. We also partner with 14 farms where we're buying in products, so we want to keep it in line. Honestly, a lot of it is just location and accepting all of these other benefits and providing discounts for folks that are using subsidized. So like if you're using a WIC coupon or a senior coupon, you have to qualify income level, and then we'll give you 50% off on top of that, or the Healthy Incentives program through the state offers that extra $40 to $80. So a lot of it is just trying to help people have an access point for their incentive programs, and then working with other farms to make sure that we're not undercutting. In fact, that's one of the reasons we're talking about leaving one of our markets, the year-round market, is because we feel like we've done our part. There are other growers there that have higher prices that we feel like we can't really get to that, and so maybe it's time for us to leave and customers can go to that farmer. Because our goal is with our markets, let's get farmers coming to Lowell. when we first started, we had one farmers market that was really underutilized, and there were maybe 1 or 2 farms that still went there, and a lot of them were buying stuff from Terminal Market and not really being true to the farmers market values. And so now it's really vibrant, and so as soon as it's really vibrant, we're ready to kind of move on to the next journey.
Any other questions? I'm curious about your experience with the volunteer garden leaders. I know that can be a challenge to find people who are able to step up and sort of sustain the effort and continue in that role. And if you've had similar struggles, or if you've found strategies that work, and who's able to step up and actually continue in that role.
It is challenging. I think it's definitely something that we are always tweaking. So we require people to go through this Garden Leadership Institute. It used to be called the Garden Coordinator Institute. It used to be 7 weeks or 7 sessions. Now it's 3 sessions. If people can't go and we think that they're a really strong leader, we say, oh, it's okay, you don't have to go. I think the most challenging thing for us is having a diverse group of garden leaders. There are so many different languages spoken in the community and in the gardens that it is really hard. Sometimes communication can be really hard in the gardens. But typically people with more time are either might have like a higher income or more flexible work schedule or things like that. So that's been one of our challenges, is just making sure that the garden leadership reflects the gardeners. But we've really tried to be creative about that. Like when we hold garden meetings, our community program staff, like they're probably doing a meeting tonight at 8 o'clock. Or, they go and visit people at their houses and make sure that they're, in strong communication with people. Honestly, I think a big component is understanding where people's limitations are and where we have to come in. We've kind of gotten to the point where we feel like the goal of the garden leadership is that they're, managing work days and kind of the day-to-day of the garden. But our role is we help with the big picture. We help with fundraising to do large garden replacements. We help manage large volunteer days if the garden leadership team says, we really want to do a communal fruit orchard bed here and do strawberries and da-da-da-da-da. We try to help them with a fundraising plan and getting a volunteer day to install that or things like that. There's always turnover. But with a large enough leadership team, I think our smallest leadership team is maybe 4 or 5 people. If there's a little turnover, it's okay. We try to keep some consistency. Anything else?
I just have more questions. Yeah. So you said you can only do these on unbuildable lots, which relatedly, I think one of the challenges in urban settings, right, is that the question of whether the plot will be available in the future, right? So do you have agreements that, your garden, it will be a garden, or can, someone come in and...
So we have license agreements for all of our city lots. We've been able to kind of like sneak in some buildable lots by getting license agreements for neighboring parcels that put together actually would be a buildable lot. We have a lease for our big farm, which is 4 acres, and that actually has a conservation restriction on it. And we have an MOU, like a year-by-year MOU with the university, which we're hoping to get like a 3-year lease with that. One of our goals over time is to have some kind of community ownership of space. There actually are some really cool groups. So there are groups in Springfield called Gardening the Community. There's a group in Boston called the Urban Farming Institute. All of these groups have purchased land and spaces, Nuestra Raíces in Holyoke. So we're looking to some other models of folks that have purchased land. There's also a movement around community land trusts, and I think that is a really interesting concept. There is an urban land trust in Lowell that we're starting to talk to about some of these possibilities of if we find land and help to find funding, could they hold the restriction on land? But I think that's a really good point. One of our farms, the one that I showed the picture of, is on private land, and we have no lease on it. And I think it's in this area where there's a ton of development. The new judicial center is being built there right now. And we know that land is we're not gonna have that forever, and it really does impact, the way we think about it. Like, we would have built, a humongous outdoor education space there. It's an amazing spot, but we do know that there's some limitation to that. Yeah. But I think that is a really, really difficult thing about urban agriculture. There are some organizations like the Food Project and other places that have partnered with land trusts and have really secured some long-term spaces, which I think is really important to keep them over time.
If there are no other questions from the audience, if anyone wants to come up individually later, I think our speaker will stick around for a few more minutes. So please feel free. Otherwise, I'd like to invite you all to come back next week. And also to, again, thank you for speaking today. It's been really great.
Our website is hillspeakers.org. We do have a lot of volunteer opportunities, so you're welcome to always reach out if you want to come out to Lowell, and happy to share more information. Thank you all.